Greetings. I am often asked by people who are planning a trip to Greece, where should I stay? Where can I go and settle down in one place for a while and really get the experience of being in Greece? And I always tell them, go to the little corner of Greece that is called the Argolid, the area around the ancient city of Argos, and stay at the lovely port of Nafplio. From that base, you can explore a corner of Greece in which you can see the remains of the prehistoric world, the Great Bronze Age, the classical civilization, the period of the Romans, and then onward through the Byzantines, the Venetians, the Turks, and right up to earth-shaking events that created the modern nation-state of Greece. It's all here in a place that also affords beautiful beaches, wonderful swimming and snorkeling, boating, fabulous views over the countryside, hikes up spectacular hills. It's all here. It's in the eastern side of the Peloponnese, and it's my recommendation for a spot to spend as long as you possibly have in order to really get to know Greece. We're going to start our visit to this area, the Argolid, at a spectacular Mycenaean fortress. A fortress that was in some way linked to both the great Mycenaean center on the hill at Argos, which is a town within sight of this fortress, Tiryns, down by the sea. Also a fortress that is somehow linked to Mycenae. The lords of Tiryns seem to have been vassals or in some way related to the great high kings up in the hills at Mycenae. When Tiryns was excavated, it turned out that it had been built on a low hill by the sea where prehistoric peoples of the Stone Age had lived long before the warriors of the Bronze Age. These people had left behind their pottery, they were farmers, they were raising crops like wheat and barley out on the vast plains, these rich soils that surround the modern town of Argos, which is famous today for its citrus fruits. And they had also created figurines that seem to us images of their goddess. And one of these little female figurines from way back in the New Stone Age, the Neolithic, survived and turned up in the excavations at this place called Tiryns. We now know from studies by geologists that in ancient times the sea was much further away from Tiryns, but with the rise of sea level, the old Stone Age settlements were drowned. They had been built very near the coast. It'll be up to underwater archaeologists in the future to go diving and find the remains of these communities which established a village farming life in Greece, which of course remained the economic basis of Greek life right down to the 20th century. Following these first farmers who have left these scanty traces behind at Tiryns, Bronze Age warrior kings came here and created a mighty citadel. I hope you've been to Mycenae. Even if you have been, you will still find that the walls of Tiryns take your breath away. Homer also, along with mentioning the richness and strength of Mycenae, calls Tiryns the place of the mighty walls. These walls are so strong and built of big, rough blocks of stone so immense that a legend grew up that a race of giants called the Cyclopes, that's plural for Cyclops, had been called in by the local kings to erect their fortresses for them. So impossible did people of a later age find it to believe that ordinary human beings had moved those huge rocks into place and had fitted them so carefully together that even now, in our own time, 3,000 years later, those walls hold firm. Tiryns is approached by a little entrance ramp, which halfway up takes a complete dogleg, a hairpin turn, and then comes back up toward a gate. All the time that you're making that constricted turn and approaching the gate, you are being exposed as an invader or someone they're suspicious of to views and, if necessary, to assaults from above by soldiers who are watching you come up to the citadel. We should never forget the warlike nature of Mycenaean society and the fact that most of their spectacular centers are fortified. But few are so massively fortified as Tiryns, perhaps because it is the closest of all the Mycenaean citadels to the sea. The ships must have been drawn up almost at the very doorstep of the kings of Tiryns. When you get through the gate, which is marked by holes in the wall where the sockets still can be seen that held the great bar that ran across the gate, take a little turn to your left down a staircase and look into the first great feature of Tiryns for us as visitors. It is a gallery made of these same massive cyclopean stones with a pointed, vaulted roof and little openings looking out to give it light and air. It's believed that this is the palace magazines, the places for storage of important things. Judging by its proximity to the gate, I sometimes wonder if it was storage for the warriors, for the equipment of war, perhaps for chariots, for other things that they might have needed in their battles. As you look down this sort of mystical passage, glowing with the reflected light from outside, you'll notice that the rocks seem to shine. This isn't any sort of human work on the masonry. It is, in fact, the byproduct of hundreds of years of local shepherds sheltering their flocks of sheep in this vaulted storage area of the old ruins. The sheep have lanolin in their wool. The sheep rubbing up against these old posts and stones for so many years have polished them to a glistening smoothness, something very much to be enjoyed and admired today. But you want to turn now, go back up the little flight of steps, and come into the entryway to the great megaron, the great hall, the feasting hall of the kings of Tiryns. Who were these kings? Well, there's an old myth about Tiryns that, as at Mycenae, associates the hero Perseus, the Gorgon slayer, the one who brought back Andromeda from Ethiopia after freeing her from the chains that were holding her at the mercy of a sea monster. This famous hero Perseus was supposed to have been a king of Tiryns. But our interest very quickly shifts to a great-grandson of Perseus, who should have inherited the throne but didn't. He's one of the most famous, the most popular of all the Greek heroes. This is the central place for the myth of Heracles. In the Latin spelling, Hercules, the strong man of ancient Greek mythology. Whenever Hercules is depicted, the artists show us that they knew something about human anatomy. The muscles around the neck and the shoulders get really big if you are used to holding huge weights over your head. And Heracles, did that again and again in what are known as his 12 labors. He should have been king of Mycenae by rights, but a brother, Eurystheus, had taken over the throne, and in order to reassert his claim, the oracle at Delphi told Heracles he must work in bondage to his brother Eurystheus for 12 years, and in each of those years he must perform a labor at his brother's bidding. He must be a servant to his brother, the strongest man in the world. Heracles, therefore, began those famous labors, which have become such a familiar element in Greek art and in Greek mythology, such labors as killing the lion of Nemea, or bringing back the golden apples of the Hesperides from the uttermost west, which he manages to do by doing service for the giant Atlas and holding up the sky over his head for a time. He kills boars and stags and evil birds. He cleans out massive stables by diverting rivers through them. Time and again, he's given the impossible mission, and against all odds, he succeeds. But all of his strength profited him nothing. Heracles was cursed by the gods, as so many mortals were, to whom some immense blessing had been given. In the case of Heracles, his strength, he was cursed with a madness. That madness drove him to do terrible things, killing his own children, for instance. So he appeared both too good and too bad for this mortal world. He was ultimately carried up into heaven and welcomed by the gods themselves on Olympus. This should have been his citadel. This is the place to sit down and think about, maybe even reread, all those wonderful stories about the hero Heracles. Now, as we turn from our entrance, we are looking into these great sets of rooms where you can still see some of the column bases, the circle where the hearth would have been. And if we were visitors, we would find the Lord and the Lady, the king and the queen of the palace, seated by that hearth in true Bronze Age style. We would make our way around the hearth. If we were seeking their protection, we would fall on our knees and clasp their knees, the knees of the king or the knees of the queen, in order to offer ourselves as people seeking their protection and willing to go into their service. If they accepted us, we would then be fed, clothed, given a bath. Mycenaean palaces were big on giving visitors baths, and take our place among the throngs who crowded into these now deserted halls. The top of Tiryns is very bare. The upper walls are mostly gone. It may have been that they were made of mud brick rather than everlasting stone. But we got another view of Tiryns by going into the other part of this high citadel, not really very high compared to places like Mycenae, but there's a large raised, elongated courtyard, which was the sort of downstairs of the great Mycenaean palace, the place for the servants, the grooms, the workers, the cooks, the craftspeople, and the livestock. Now we know of one specific type of livestock that they must have kept in there, and they probably, of course, had cattle and sheep and goats as well, and pigs, all the animals that Homer describes as being at the palaces of his Mycenaean heroes. But we know they kept horses, and we know that they had chariots. And because, in spite of the bareness of Tiryns as a site, it boasted many fabulous frescoes on which the painters left images of the life of the wealthy people in the palace. Those frescoes are now in the museums, either at Nafplio or all the way up at the National Museum in Athens. We can get a picture of the lifestyle of these kings. They loved hunting. There are scenes with their hunting dogs going through vegetation in pursuit of wild boars that are fleeing in terror from the packs of hounds of the kings of Tiryns. And we know that they loved chariot riding, not for warfare only, but for pleasure. My favorite of all of the fresco remnants from Tiryns, those beautiful painted sheets of plaster which once made this forbidding fortress so lovely, so brimming with life and color. My favorite shows two women. Their ringlets of dark hair, their smiles on their faces. They are driving between them. There's no driver to be seen otherwise. A chariot with horses, and they are going through the countryside. And we in fact know that in this area, a network of roads connected sites like Tiryns and Mycenae and sites off toward the Saronic Gulf, through the hills to the north. The lines of these roads can be picked out because in order to get the chariots over the gullies, massive Mycenaean bridges were created in Cyclopean masonry, just like that gallery that you saw, the magazines of Tiryns, when you first entered this palace. And you can seek out, if you've got time, as I hope you're spending some time in the Argolid, staying at Nafplio, you can seek out some of these fabulous bridges. In fact, for a while, my favorite road sign in the world was at one of these Mycenaean bridges. Last time I went by, it was down, but I hope it'll be back for you. It was a road sign that said Mycenaean Bridge in modern Greek, in English, I believe in French, and then finally in Linear B characters of Mycenaean Greek script. A truly humorous and beautiful touch. Having explored the wonders of this great citadel of Tiryns, thought about that Bronze Age mythological hero, Heracles, let's now think about the age that came after the Bronze Age. Around 1200, somehow, the Bronze Age system of palaces controlling these vast areas of countryside collapsed, both on mainland Greece and on islands like Crete. And it was replaced by a period, the Iron Age, where the countryside was depopulated, there were no major cities in Greece, the land lost its fertility and was no longer worked regularly by people. Literacy was lost. The import of luxury goods tapered off to almost nothing. We don't know what the disaster was. Archaeologists still argue about exactly what happened. What we do know is that after a few centuries of dark ages, civilization began to bubble up again. Not initially in the form of cities. The polis was yet to be born with its center around the agora, the open market. but rather in the form of great halls, probably initially made of timber, each one housing a big man, a local man who was a warrior, and who gathered around him companions, sort of as in the old days. And we certainly know that the bards and singers of tales back in the Mycenaean world somehow endured on and became great artists like Homer, who in the 8th century BC, when that long period of about 4 centuries following the collapse of the Mycenaean kingdoms finally drew to a close, these singers were the great artists of the time, not architects, not painters, but people who took the traditional songs of the old, dead Bronze Age world and wove it into fantastic new epics. This was in company with a new world of militarism. In some of the museums around this area, the museum at Argos and the museum at Nafplio, you can see the transition from Mycenaean warrior to classical warrior. Let's start with the Mycenaean warrior. Go to the museum in Nafplio, and you will see a fantastic set of armor from the Bronze Age period. Very unexpectedly, no one had ever dreamed that they were made this way, the body armor showed up in the tomb of a warrior at a place called Dendra, a little bit east of Argos, and it turned out to be circles of sheet bronze looking very much like the Michelin man's body parts, which hung from the shoulders and protected the body. It's very hard for us to imagine how this warrior was very mobile in this bizarre armor. But on his head was something that Homer had described in the Iliad, a helmet which is decorated on the outside with the tusks of wild boars. They are fitted in rows, and a number of wild boars must have been killed to furnish each warrior with his own boar's tusk helmet. So here's a link both to Homer and his epic tradition coming out of the Bronze Age, and a type of armor specific to that Bronze Age royal world that did not make it over the great divide of the Dark Ages into classical Greece. If we want to see the classical mode appearing really for the first time here in the Argolid, in the area around Argos, we need to go to the museum at Argos, that modern market town that clusters around the foot of a conical hill on which there are Bronze Age remains, and admire a suit of armor that was found in a tomb of the 8th century BC. Here we see the cuirass, or bronze breastplate of a warrior, with his own anatomical pectoral muscles, and sometimes on similar models, even his six-pack there, to show I've got the goods, I'm a tough guy, I'm a muscular guy. Well, he needed to be because his armor was very heavy, including a bronze helmet with a crest on the top, and something not represented in this tomb, the other element of this new kind of classical Greek warrior's equipment, a great circular shield. Greeks called this the shield from Argos, the Argive shield. And it was the shield used by the new fighting men of Greece in the classical age, the fighting men who fought shoulder to shoulder in rows, not forging ahead into the enemy as individual champions, laying about them on their own for their own glory, but men, all equals, all in line, interlocked like links in a chain, each defending the other behind his broad circular shield and marching steadily forward in a formation that would break up even enemy cavalry troops. It was so hard for other peoples to fight. Argos may be the very place where this new kind of warfare began, a warfare that initially made the Greeks successful all over the Mediterranean, made them desirable as mercenary troops to be hired by kings of Babylon or pharaohs of Egypt, allowed young men to go abroad, serve foreign kings, or be Viking-like raiders, attacking towns, bringing back the loot, enriching Greece again, pumping gold, wealth, foreign ideas into Greece. These warriors, exemplified here by these finds at Argos, are the ones who really spark and touch off the classical world of Greece, and they are inspired throughout by the songs of poets like Homer, who are allegedly describing the heroics of the Bronze Age kings, but careful to work in to their own descriptions of the warfare at Troy or at Thebes or at other sites, elements that echo with this new world of excitement. And we can imagine, as we stand at Argos or at Nafplio or Tiryns, the ships being launched out onto that beautiful blue water, just as they had been in the Bronze Age. In fact, from the Bronze Age, we have from Tiryns a little scene of men departing from that area it's on a gold signet ring, getting into a ship and going out across those blue waters to adventure in the great outside world. That is renewed now in the 8th century BC in Argos. At the same time, communities begin to grow together, each one forming what we call a polis, a Greek city-state. And Argos became one of the great ones. And initially, in its first great battle, when its hoplite phalanx took the field, it beat the neighboring Spartans, fellow Dorian Greeks, who the Argives always regarded as their chief rivals. Why don't we hear much about Argos in Greek history? As you will see if you go to the town, and believe me, few do, it has its own Greek theater, it has its own agora area, it has its public buildings, just as Athens does. Why did it fall into the shadows? It's because the Argives were not typical Greeks. Having apparently established hoplite warfare, they acquired a distaste for the relentless, endless fighting that typified the lives of so many Greeks throughout the classical period. The city of Argos remained neutral in both the Persian wars, imagine being neutral with the Persians invading from northern Greece, and remained neutral during the Peloponnesian War between Athens and the Spartans and Peloponnesians on the other side. The Argives are Peloponnesians, but they just wouldn't join in for most of that epic conflict. Well, neutrals don't tend to make history. And so they lost some sort of their edge of dynamism. They certainly lost the attention of the historians and slipped into obscurity. But you can still enjoy some of the sites of great classical monuments in the world of Argos. Not only was the city the site of many beautiful monuments, but there was a spectacular place out in the country, a sanctuary to the east of the city dedicated to their great goddess Hera, the queen of the gods, and probably really that old mother goddess of the Bronze Age. Remember the name Heracles means glory of Hera. So she was probably right there as the mother of the gods all the way back in the Bronze Age and survived to be the patron goddess of Argos in this new classical world. East of the city, at a countryside sanctuary called the Heraion, the place sacred to Hera, she had her temples. And they were built on terraces, and they commanded magnificent views out over the Argive plain and to the sea. And one of them, the most beautiful of them apparently, the classical temple, burned down one day when the high priestess who was supposed to be attending the sacred fire fell asleep. The fire caught some of the hangings and offerings on fire. A great conflagration resulted. The whole temple burned down. So here we can't blame barbarians. The Greeks did it to themselves. That woman, by the way, ran for her life and took refuge somewhere else for fear of the punishment that the people of Argos might give to her for letting their temple burn down. I urge you to take a side trip to the Heraion. It's a little hard to find, but as you take the roads up toward Mycenae from Nafplio, you will see right turn signs that lead you up into the slopes to the Heraion. Almost all the buildings are gone now. You will see the foundations and some of the lower courses of stone, but you will experience a magical site, one of those sites that does feel holy. The great Yale architectural history professor Vincent Scully wrote a book called The Earth, the Temple, and the Gods, about how having certain mountain peaks on the horizon or having a certain conjunction of geological and geographical features would make a site feel holy to the Greeks. That theory really prevailed for Professor Scully at the Heraion, where the temples were in line with a mountain that had a twin peak at the top, as if it were the breasts of the Earth Mother appearing there on the horizon, guiding her worshipers to orient their prayers right toward her. You'll climb those terraces, you'll have that magnificent view, you'll see the mountains surrounding you in this little circle, and you'll feel one of the enduring spirits of Greece, born in the Bronze Age, carried on through the classical period, and climaxing then with the creation of the temples for this greatest of the goddesses of Argos, the goddess Hera. Now, what of the Roman period? Well, go back to the Argos Museum, where you've already seen the panoply, the arms of that early hoplite warrior from the 8th century BC. You'll see some beautiful Roman mosaics too. During the Roman period, Greek wealthy people settled down in elaborate houses and put Roman-style multicolored mosaics on the floor. There's a beautiful one of the seasons, spring, summer, winter, fall, all represented by a mythological figure. But I recommend that you get in your car and head south down the coast from Argos, from Tiryns, to a little place called Ava, where the greatest of all Roman period villas was built in Greece. It was built by a millionaire from the time of the Emperor Hadrian. You may already know about him, Herodes Atticus. He left one of the great landmarks of Athens, building the Odeon of Herodes Atticus, dedicated to his dead wife Regilla, on the south slope of the Acropolis in Athens, and the mighty remains of that Odeon are still there. He also left at Olympia a fantastic set of sculptures of his patrons and of various people who had been important to him in his life. At this place, Ava, he created a Roman-style villa that seems totally out of place in the Greek landscape, but shows us that the world of Rome was imposed on the Greeks once Greece became part of the Roman Empire. And we have to remember, as we walk around the remains of these courtyards, these atriums, these fabulous Roman halls, all, of course, reduced just to ground level, that we're walking in a place where Herodes Atticus, the Greek owner, once invited the Emperor Hadrian himself to come, along with the Emperor Hadrian's wife, and along with the Emperor Hadrian's beloved boy, Antinous, a young Greek fellow who he picked up during a travel to the Greek areas of Asia Minor. That must have been one memorable house party. But it's part of that time in which Greek-loving, culture-loving Romans were lavishing their attention on old Greece, and some Greeks were achieving tremendous wealth and aping the Roman manners in their own land. When Constantine moved the center of the Greek world to Constantinople and Rome was abandoned as the chief capital, that was the beginning of a transition to what's called the Byzantine period, since the old name for Constantinople, modern Istanbul, had been Byzantium, a Greek colony up there on the Bosporus. Under the Byzantines, this area also was regarded as very important. And to see the Byzantines and the rest of our occupants, Venetians, Turks, modern independent Greeks, let's go to this place, which I think should be the home base for our time in the Argolid, the port of Nafplio, and let's go up to the Acro Nafplio, the high Nafplio, the Acropolis of the little town. It's an elongated ridge, today mainly occupied by various castle walls and by a great hotel. And there we will see remains of the Byzantine stonework that fortified this place and made it a strong outpost of the Byzantine Empire, a place where its ships and its merchants could come ashore in the Peloponnese and trade and keep in contact with this important old Greek world that was now subject to new kings, new overlords, new emperors ruling from Constantinople, from Byzantium. The Byzantines remained in control of Greece and using Nafplio as one of their bases up until the Venetians, the citizens of Venice, treacherously attacked Byzantium itself during the course of one of the Crusades and basically taken over the city and broken for a time the power of the Byzantines. The Venetians also came later to Nafplio and made it their city. The Venetians were in control, alternating back and forth with Ottoman Turks. As you look from the Acro Nafplio down at the town of Nafplio, look at its beautiful plan. Look at the grid of streets. Look at the town square surrounded by beautiful buildings. You're seeing the creation of Venetian city planners from the Renaissance who wanted this to be a little Venice, not in the sense of a city of canals, but a sense of order, light, a community that all could be proud of and could flourish in. Walk around Nafplio, you will see many marks of the Venetian presence, including, above all, big stone plaques on which there is a winged lion of St. Mark and the book of St. Mark's Gospel That's the emblem of Venice, the Lion of St. Mark. Out in the harbor, which the Venetians helped create, is a little Venetian castle on an island. It's called Borzi. Take the boat out to it from the docks. You can wander around for half an hour, take in this fantastic bit of Venetian architecture, and then look up at the corresponding fabulous place on the heights, the Palamidi Fortress, which was finished in 1714 and captured by the Turks in 1715. Climb to the Palamidi Fortress. It's supposed to be 1,000 steps. I don't think it's quite that many. But look down and imagine what it would have been to be a Venetian trying to defend that town against the 50 warships of the Ottoman Turks and 120,000 troops who had been landed with the express purpose of capturing this last Venetian stronghold in Greece, the stronghold of Nafplio. The Turks succeeded. By 1715, Nafplio and the rest of Greece was a province, a part of the Ottoman Empire. And so it remained for about a century, until in the early 1800s, in 1821, the revolution was launched, the Greek War of Independence, and it started at Nafplio. Nafplio became the first capital of the new nation of Greece. Nafplio became the city that first brought back to life the dream of Agamemnon, one place in which the rule of an entire country could be centered, that country, that nation called Greece. There's much of pleasure to enjoy in Nafplio, but behind the pleasure, behind the Turkish buildings, beyond the mix of cultures that have come to Greece and found inspiration there, lies the idea of Greece itself, a united Greece, a heroic Greece. And this was the town in modern times where that fire was lit again after being extinguished for so many centuries.